Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, joined by Sam and Bill. Sam, I think this is our first podcast together this draft cycle. I know we've got a few other things in the works. How's this draft cycle treating you?
Yeah, it's going well so far. I always feel like I'm behind a little bit. I feel like Bill's caught up to me, definitely. I got a bit of a head start last year, but I think Bill has definitely caught up to me and gotten past me at this point. But doing good. Just trying to check off some final names to hopefully get a top 200 here together the next couple of weeks. But so far, it's been fun. I wish I found a few more first rounders than I have so far, but I'm still holding out hope to catch a couple here before the end of the cycle or before the end of the summer.
And Bill, It's good to see you. And I think I'm going to be seeing a lot of you between tonight and tomorrow night. But how are things with you?
Yeah, I mean, things are good. You'll be seeing me a little bit later on when we cover Miami and all of their draft prospects, then tomorrow night with quarterbacks. And then obviously I got some other things in the works. I'm going to be chatting with Steve, another draft professor, on Saturday, and sitting down with Dale from Bengals and Brews on Sunday. It's a jam-packed weekend, and I'm excited because we're finally, feels like, in the swing of things with summer scouting and kind of swinging back towards college football season finally. I know Sam and I were talking in the studio beforehand, and it feels like just yesterday the national championship game ended, and now here we are, almost the start of the season. And I'm excited. I'm ready to see if some of these guys that we're projecting as top flight talent can keep that projection, or if we start to see some folks emerge. I know Dane Brugler just dropped his edge rankings, so it's kind of the first firework of the draft season when you see Dane start dropping rankings everywhere.
Yeah, so I will definitely say fireworks. There was definitely some discussion in the Draft Professor chat on Dane's edge list. So I will share the list here very briefly so that people can see the list. So Sam, do you want to just kind of highlight who the top 7 were and then go from there?
Yeah, so Dane has a unique format where he goes through his top 7 overall, but then he'll also break it down to the list ranked on his top seniors and top underclassmen as well. But his top 7 overall were number 1, Keldrick Folk from Auburn, 2, T.J. Parker from Clemson, 3, L.T. Overton from Alabama, 4, Mateo Uyunglele from Oregon, 5, David Bailey, who's at Texas Tech via Stanford, 6 is Zion Young from Missouri, and 7 is R. Mason Thomas. So there's a couple names here. Like, I think we know most names here. We're pretty comfortable most of them being in this discussion. But I do think Bill and I have some points to raise here to discuss these guys being so high on the list.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the first one I really want to talk about is Zion Young from Missouri being so high. I've got a round 6 grade on him because I don't see it with Zion Young. For me, he's like, my comp for him is Sam Hubbard, a very good run defender. But when you look at Zion, there's a lot to be desired when it comes to his pass rush plan. And he can get into the top 100. Don't get me wrong, but if we're talking top 10, top 20, I don't see it. What about you, Sam?
No, I also gave him a 6 round grade, and I do a thing where I give out a round grade, but I also give out like a high and low. Like, where's this guy's ceiling? Where's this guy's floor? And to me, the ceiling really, I don't see a guy who in one season can go from where he was last year to being top 100 player. It's just such a large gap for him to cover. And like, if he declared right now, like if he declared in a loaded edge class, which he had a couple of those the past couple of years, I wouldn't guarantee he'd be drafted per se. Now, granted, the arm length and stuff like that, some of the tools might get him picked, but like, he's not a guy who I feel inclined to, as a team, select if I have needs at other positions. So Zion Young was really surprising. I'm sure there's some feedback in the NFL because, sometimes this is the time of summer we get scouts who will be buying into tools, maybe more so than production and technical development. And then as some of the higher ups in the organization get into it, you maybe adjust that opinion a little bit. But Zion Young to me is a player who's just very unrefined. I don't think he's got like as much natural power as you're hoping for. And frankly, he was not the best pass rusher on his own team last year. And he might not be his best pass rusher on the team this year.
No, I agree. The other one that caught my eye was R. Mason Thomas from Oklahoma. I've got a 4th round grade on him. And for me, he's a lot like Jonah Ellis was. He's got a good first step and kind of a natural bend. But ultimately, when you look at him, the injury history with his ankles, obviously, when you have edges that have ankle problems, a lot of that bend is going to come from that ankle. So how stable is it? He also has a lot of discipline lapses in contain. There's a lot of times where you see him breaking containment and it lead to a bigger play that gets saved from him on the back end. So I think he can get into the top 100, maybe even the top 50, but top 5, top 7, that's a little rich for me.
Yeah, it might be more reflective of the edge class as a whole. I love our Mason Thomas quite a bit. Now, granted, I grade really hard with some of my stuff, so I do have I think a 3rd round mark on him right now. But to me, he's a secure top 100 player, and there just are not very many of those guys in the classroom at this point. We're talking 65 or so of them, so he's a fairly high ranked player. But you look at what does the NFL value in edge rushers? Well, he's got shorter arms, he's undersized, doesn't weigh ideal weight. To me, this is a true DPR type player. You're not playing on him every down. You're putting him in there as the change of pace guy who's going to just speed rush the heck out of you. And there are a couple of guys like that in this class who have that similar, maybe early career DPR numbers. Your best hope is that he becomes Nick Bonito, I would say. That's probably the ultimate outcome for you, is get a player like that. But you watch the one rep he had in LSU versus Will Campbell, and then you watch the Alabama game, and there's just something to this player. I really enjoy his tape. I want to buy in on him, but at the same time, I recognize there are limitations there. That with having him be your edge 7, well, that might actually line up closely with my rankings because I like him a lot. I can understand overall why there may be a concern with him and why you would want to have other people who are not included in the top 7 be ranked above him. And for me, the major concern is, again, the measurables just are not there. He's 6'1", 5'8", verified, 249, and then the arm length is nowhere close to 33 inches. So that's just my biggest concern with him, is he won't meet the measurables. Super explosive, twitchy kind of player, but the consistency is not there. And frankly, the pass rush plan, he relies a lot more right now on physical traits than he does technical development. Which for guys short arms might be the case always, but at the same time, you would like to see a few more pass rush moves in the arsenal.
Yeah, so Sam, that was one of the questions that I had percolating. How much of Dane's list do you think the film is there? That's where they're graded. To me, that's TJ Parker. Everything I've heard on Keldrick, Falk, TJ Parker, the film's there. They deserve to be graded that high. And how much of that is a projection on the rankings to you, where it's projected that the player's going to go that high, but maybe the film doesn't back it up yet?
Well, I think the top 3 you can lock in, LT Overton's also in that category for me, where I had a 2nd round mark. I had an early 2nd round mark on him last year, and had he come out, I think he would have ended up being a 1st round kind of pick. This year, even baking a little bit of development, I think he's definitely going to be a 1st round kind of player. Once you get to 4 with Mateo, I think that's when you really start seeing some question marks pop up, because Uyunglele is certainly a high motor player. He's got good density, but needs to improve his pass rush plan down to down. And frankly, just is not the caliber of athlete you're looking for, a true 1st round kind of player. And if you're edge 4 in a class, it's kind of saying you should be a 1st round player. You should see 5 guys or so per class with serious 1st round considerations. Probably another 2 or 3 who you would think have a chance to sneak in at the back end. Mateo, to me, really is not that kind of player. I'm looking at him more as a true 2nd rounder. There's a little bit more of a limited player. You might end up seeing him be a George Karlaftis caliber production-wise kind of player in the NFL, which is certainly still a very good player if he ends up being that. That's kind of the ceiling for him, in my opinion. The other guys, Zion Young, to me is a total projection. I think we went over him pretty thoroughly. Our Mason Thomas, the tape's out there for him. It's just a question of, is that role big enough to justify taking that high? And then David Bailey's a player who I really like him based on the tape he has. I think there's some projection baked in there because he's more, again, one of these more explosive athletes who relies a lot on that natural athleticism. But he's put definitely more on tape, I think, to the point of showing technical development than our Mason Thomas has. He's a more well-rounded player. He is kind of primarily a speed, rush, bendy type player off the edge. But I think that's more of a finished product than I think some people realize in the industry. To me, David Bailey is the kind of guy who can be that back into the 1st round type player.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with Sam. For me, I think the top three are pretty much there. I still have Mateo Ugalele as my edge 5. So if you told me edge 4, I'm not mad at all. I think ultimately he is a second round top 50 guy. David Bailey too is one of those guys that, is an athletic freak. I mean, he made the Feldman's freak list in 2023. So you have to have some sort of athlete like that. And he's violent with a motor that just runs all night long. But ultimately the question, his frame at his size, it looks like 240 his max. And I don't know how you're going to have him add much more, which means, do you stand him up in like a 3-4 defense as an outside linebacker, or do you trust to put his hand in the dirt at 240 pounds? And there's a lot of, I love his aggressiveness, but sometimes it's too much on the point of over pursuit and losing containment. I love players that can play with their hair on fire, but can also keep that hair on fire in a helmet. If you're consistently all over the place and you're breaking containment, you're hurting the team more than you're helping. So I think Bailey kind of teeters on that line of, this is more of a projection. If he goes to Texas Tech, which is where he's going to end up, and he ends up in that defense and he hones everything in, could I see him this high? Absolutely. But I also have kind of an early 4th round grade on him as well, kind of right around where I have R. Mason Thomas too.
This class as a whole, Bill, seems to have a lot of, you're either really densely built, but not like a bendy, really high level athlete, or you are super bendy, super athletic, but you're not like kind of dense enough. You're really like, there's not a lot of people who fit in the model of both of them. It's just like, that to me, like there's no true blue chip guy in this class. Like, I like Keldrick Fall. I like these players, but they're not like, when you think about those players who are blue chippers to me, like those are usually like 4 or 5 a class. I don't think any of these guys fall into that bucket right now.
No, I agree with you. And you hit the nail on the head there. There's guys that are really, really bendy, really athletic, but they're not well built. And then there's guys that are really well built, but they're not athletic. And even the guys at the top, Keldrick Falk, TJ Parker, Ruben Bain, they don't straddle that line of blue chip guys. And I mean, right now, Ruben Bain is my edge 1 and my number 1 overall player. But part of that also is baked into positional value, because edges typically get pushed up boards. And when you have a guy like Bain, who's a little bit larger, but not quite as bendy, but also still violent and powerful, could he be edge 1? Absolutely. Could he fall out of the first round? Absolutely. Same thing for Parker and for Falk too. So this edge class is weird, considering where we just came from the past couple of classes with guys like, Abdul Carter and even the Shamar Stewart conversation, the Nick Scorton's conversation last year, to now this class, which it feels like the pendulum has swung completely in the opposite direction in terms of heavy extremes between the two edges.
What data do we have about the underclassmen edges that declare versus go back? And meaning, so the reason why I'm asking, I'm looking at the list that Sam posted in the group chat, where it says draft eligible underclassmen with Falk, Parker, Ugalele, and Bain being the top 4 edges, and they're all underclassmen. What's the likelihood that we think that all of them declare? Is that the way that edge usually goes? To most of the underclassmen that are that high enter the draft?
Usually they come out, although like Jared Verse, a more recent example of someone who didn't. Jared Verse, I had a top 15 grade on, and then he went back to school, ended up still being a high draft pick. But I think usually the edges come out. It's a position where age does matter, not as much as corner per se, but it does matter to some extent. With NIL, that might change a little bit. NIL edge is such a high value position now that NIL guys can get $3 to $4 million if they're really good, and some of these guys are. But I generally think if you're a quality edge, you just go to the draft. Don't risk the injury in college. I don't have any specific numbers for it, but you had to ask me, like, Overton was a player who could have declared this past year. He came back, so he's another guy who's now a senior now, but he's a player who could have declared it, could have had a first-round chance, and he went back to school. So it's not unheard of in recent history to have these guys be high-value prospects, still go back to school, and end up being just as good or even higher caliber players in the draft.
Yeah, and you look at all of those names, Parker, Bain, Ugalele, Falk, they're all true or redshirt juniors. I think they're all true juniors. So we've seen kind of what they can be. And I think ultimately, even though they're still classified as underclassmen, I think if they come out and they play the way we think they will in terms of talent, in terms of skill set, in terms of overall athletic ability or overall build, I think all four of them don't really have a reason to return to school. It's not like quarterback where, like the Arch Manning conversation we consistently have where he can go back to school, he can win a Heisman, he can win a national championship, he can win a host of awards. Edge rushers, you can't really top what you've done short of setting a single season sack record. And even then, the likelihood of you going back to school, now you're a year older, so you should be expected to perform better against competition. So the ceiling gets significantly raised, and you're not going to see a lot of seniors meet that ceiling.
Yeah, if you're a 23-year-old going against some of these 20-year-old offensive linemen, the expectations are entirely different than if you're 21 going against like people your own age.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, so, Bill, you see the question there from Owen in the chat. Where would you put Shamar Stewart in this class?
So it's a fun question because if you're asking me where would I put Shamar Stewart from last year into this class, I would probably put him somewhere at edge 8 or 9. If you're asking me where I would put Shamar Stewart, who's a year older, into this class, he's probably going to slide down the board a bit more, probably to edge 13 or 14, because just like Sam talked about, you're a year older, you're going to be expected to dominate even more. And Shamar Stewart didn't really dominate from a statistical standpoint last season. So now you're expecting him to be a year older and raise that ceiling of domination. And you already didn't really dominate to begin with. So for me, I have a hard time if everything happens and he goes to the NCAA and he gets the waiver, goes through the entire legal process, and he can return to school, which is all a bunch of huge ifs. I have a hard time believing next year he's going to go any higher than what he did this year.
Yeah, by the time he got through that legal process, it'd be 2027. So I wouldn't have to he wouldn't have to do that. But
yep.
For me, I think I have a bit of a different answer. So for me, he was just going through it now, he's my edge 4 last year. So I had him below a couple of guys, but he was in like my second round evaluation bucket, which is where I had LT Overton before he went back to school. LT's kind of moved up into that top 4 edge grouping for me now. I think at worst, Shamar Stewart would be edge 5 for me. After TJ Parker, Overton, Ruben Bain, Keldrick Fault, he'd at least be edge 5. And I think you can make the argument he could potentially be a little bit higher than that. There are still some projections even among that grouping a little bit. Like TJ Parker doesn't have really good run defense tape. And Shamar Stewart's coming from a system at Texas A&M where a lot of those guys underperformed, underproduced. It's not just Shamar Stewart, it's also Nick Scourton. It's the whole defensive front and how they ran that. Frankly, Cassius Howell is the only guy who actually really met expectations or exceeded them within that defense. He's been going back to school. So I think you can say, well, it just wasn't the right system. Even those guys have talked about it a bit in terms of like they weren't playing at their ideal weights. They weren't playing in their ideal defensive schemes per se. So I think that for me, he would probably be a top 5 edge in this class overall, but I would still have him more in that second round bucket than in the true like locked in first round grouping.
Yeah. And I took a look on my board. I had him edge 8 last year with a second round grade. I think if he went back, if you put that into this year's class, he'd probably be about that same rate. But for me, ultimately, that extra year is a concern because, like we just talked about, that's a year older, so you should be expected to dominate. But also, combine numbers shouldn't affect our evaluation. They don't for me. They're nice to have, but they don't really affect. But we know that there are NFL front offices and talent evaluators that drool over those combine numbers. So you'd have to think for him to go back to school, spend another season performing at Texas A&M, and then come back out next year in next year's combine in February. Conversation is he already had a 10 RAS score. How's he going to top it? So anything else short of that would be a disappointment. And I would wager there would be a few talent evaluators that would look negatively on that. But what do you think, Sam?
I mean, I tend to agree. Like, there's just no way kind of top the work you've done at that point to some extent. Like, you've just put out your best efforts out there, really, and it's the athletic traits, because you're not going to get that production. So with that kind of out there, I don't know how high you would climb after that. Jim, you asked for juniors who went back to school. We have two examples from this past year's draft. We have Jack Sawyer and JTT from Ohio State, both of who kind of come out and declared as juniors, went back to school. A bit of a tale of two halves really to these guys, because Jack Sawyer goes back to school. I thought his junior tape was actually the best tape he had. I thought it was better than this past year. He ends up being a 4th-round pick to Pittsburgh. When some people in the summer thought he could have been like a top 50, top 60 guy. Yep. JTT, who thought people thought could have been a first rounder after his sophomore year tape, ends up being a 2nd-round pick, 45 overall to the Colts. It's not a bad pick, but certainly not where I think some expectations were for him after like his true sophomore year. So I think those guys got paid quite a lot to go back to school. So I think they're fine with it. Yeah. But at the same time, if you're trying to maximize your draft value, Sawyer coming out of year 3, I think even JTT coming out after year 3 probably would have been the best move if you were trying to get drafted the highest way possible.
And also to build on what you said, one of the things I observed with JTT and Sawyer specifically, not only did they go back to school, they played every game in the playoffs. I think there were some draft eligible players that may have said, I'm not playing in the playoffs. Didn't we have at least one? That
I'm off the top of my head.
Yeah, I was thinking, I thought it peculiar that a couple teams made, and maybe it was just they were at the bowl, and we see that all the time, right?
Where there were a few bowl opt-outs because they played in the playoffs from Ohio State and Notre Dame, both sides as well. I believe, if I remember correctly, I believe Xavier Watts might have been one of them.
Yep.
I don't think that Sawyer or JTT were invited to any bowls off the top of my head.
Will Howard was. Will Howard was invited to Senior Bowl, right?
Howard was. Yeah, Howard was invited to
Riley
Senior
Leonard
Bowl.
too.
Yep. So that's another thing about what the playoff can do. Yes, you have a chance to win a national championship, but ultimately the national championship ended on the 20th and the Senior Bowl kicked off a week later. So you're talking, go through 19 games. And then, also, by the way, go ahead and turn around and go down to Mobile for another 3 days after you've just been beat up for 19 games. So I think you're going to see some of the top flight talent start to kind of err on that side of caution, especially if they know that their ceiling is pretty much capped. Like if a TJ Parker and a Peter Woods, for example, decided to say, hey, we got invited to a Senior Bowl, a Shrine Bowl, or whatever, but we're opting out, nobody would blame them.
Yeah, I think those events even sort of like more so made for some of the smaller school prospects. Like for me, it hurt not seeing Chase Lunt out there because Chase Lunt got injured in the bowl game. Actually, he played for Connecticut. Charles Grant wasn't there. Like I think those are the guys that those games are mainly aimed at. I know obviously they recruit the big names, try to get them there, but to me, when I go to the Senior Bowl, I'm really trying to watch for some of those smaller school guys, some of the guys further down the board who are trying to play up level in competition. But it does stink though, seeing all those names out there with the graphics and all that stuff. And you're like, okay, I can watch this player and this player and this player. I want to talk to this guy. And then you get down there and it's like, oh, by the way, here's 30 names that are not actually here that were announced originally. It's quite the pivot during the actual week itself.
100%.
But Bill, you brought up Ruben Bain, so I want to transition a little bit because you brought up him earlier in the show. Bain not in the top 7 for Dane, but he was his fourth overall underclassman on the board. Falk, Parker, and Uyunglele being the top 3. Then it's Ruben Bain, Kenyatta Jackson, and then Anto Saka. And to me, there's been a drop off after those 6. You said Ruben Bain's your top guy. I view Ruben Bain as like a tier 1 or tier 2 player in this class to me, which is like either like a late first to early second type player. And I look at him, I've seen some people kind of drift away from the Ruben Bain hype, but I go back to some of the basic stuff. Like this guy was injured. He hurt his ankle, like when it was ankle or like lower body week 1, like a couple snaps into the season. And he came back and he just wasn't quite as explosive. You go back, and I'm a Clemson fan, so I remember the Clemson versus Miami game from 2023. And I went back and I watched that game today before this podcast. And Bane is like a monster out there destroying everyone. And I think he's more explosive in that tape than what you saw this past year. I generally think he just wasn't healthy. And when you have those instances where you can't really move around the way you want to, you maybe add some bad weight through the course of the year. And I just think that he was more explosive in 2023. And I think, yeah, there's some limitations. He's not super bendy. His arms are a bit shorter. This is going to be a guy who's primarily going to win through the B gap or win through the body of the lineman versus winning on the outside. But at the same time, I saw him win in enough ways where I still feel comfortable with this guy being a top 32 selection. Will he be a top 10 guy? Probably not, because he doesn't check enough boxes. He's a bit like, on the shorter side, but he's very dense. I think that he's still a first-round pick in my opinion. And I get the feedback must have not been great for Dane to have him this low.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm going to stay true to my evaluation for now. I think that he'll probably have a bit of a rebound year because he won't be injured. He'll have a full offseason to recover and get better.
100%. I agree with you. He's my top edge and my number one overall player. And it's because I factored in that medical issue because it was a calf injury. And when you're an edge and you have a calf injury, you just don't have the push off that you do. And when he was fully healthy, like you talked about against Clemson, that explosiveness is there. And you see him win in enough ways. If he were in a 5 technique, if he was in a wide 9 conversation, which we run in Cleveland, he can win in a multitude of ways. Yes, he's a little bit short at 6'3", 275, but I think he's going to come in probably closer to 6'1" or 6'2", based on what I see. So would you like him to be a little bit smaller? Absolutely. But ultimately, I think if he's fully healthy with the fact that he's got a very good first step and very vicious hands, my comp for him is Brandon Graham. And Brandon Graham, in the same way he did it at Michigan, won physically, but also had enough juice to win on the outside. I think that's what you can get. Now, are you going to be wanting to take that top 10, top 12? Brandon Graham went, I believe, 13th. So are you going to want to take that top 10, top 5? Probably not. But that's also kind of how we view this edge class. There's, like you mentioned at the top of the hour, there's not really a blue chip guy here that you can hang your hat on, the Abdul Carter conversation of the world, that you can say, yeah, he's from bell to bell, he's a blue chip guy. And even then, Abdul Carter going into the summer last season wasn't even a blue chip guy. So I think ultimately we have to see who can emerge from this class, just because there's not really that guy. But I am surprised that Dane didn't even have him in his top 7. And I know there's been some whispers. I've heard some folks have him outside the top 32 altogether. I just don't see that possible, not with his size and explosiveness.
Well, and personally, not in this class either. Like there are not enough names I feel comfortable with to jump up that high. But
yeah, so we're covering Bane at 9 p.m. You'll be able to hear even more from Bill. We will have Bill, EJ, and Andrew Harmon breaking down the entire Miami draft class at 9 p.m. So, Sam, you have Bane. You said in a tier where you're at least grading him as he's an immediate starter at the NFL level.
Yes. Yep. For me, he's an immediate starter.
Yep. And then Bill, you're saying immediate starter, but not blue chip, correct?
Yeah, I'm saying immediate starter, not blue chip. He's my number one overall player, and part of that is because he plays the edge rusher position, so they're going to get pushed up boards.
So I have 2 questions. So TJ Guy was on Dane's list. That was actually the first edge I looked for on his list. So there seems to be a lot going on with TJ Guy from Michigan in the Draft Professor group chat. We covered Michigan last night, and Owen can project a blue chip grade on TJ Guy. Right? Owen, you did say last night it was projection. I actually listened to the podcast again because I actually thought that was just really well done by everybody there. But Sam, where do you have TJ Guy? And specifically to Owen's questions, what kinds of things should he be looking for? Or do you have a game to reference where maybe you see some of those negative things?
Yeah, not off the bat. I will say, I'm not a Derek Moore guy on that team. I don't really have much faith in Derek Moore. I think TJ Guy actually showcases better power overall. But I'd say, when you're looking at Guy, I would try to check out consistency versus the top programs that had an NFL caliber offensive lineman. Check out the Oregon game, and I would go back and pay some close attention to the Alabama game at the end of the season. See if the power holds up, see if the bend holds up. But to me, like, Guy is criminally ranked low on this list. Dane has him among seniors, ranked 28th among all senior edge rushers. To me, I would probably have them like mid-teens at least. To me, that was a pretty big drop-off after 15 on the list. So I think I would have TJ Guy much higher than Dane does. I don't have a full round grade on him yet. I still have to go back and get him. I've already done Derek Moore. I did Derek Moore way early in the process. But like Guy, and I'm trying to remember, give me 1 second while I pull the name up. The other, like their edge, like 4 last year. Because they always have 4 quality edge rushers. The name is Cameron Brandt. Also stood out to me in the process. Brandt's not as bendy as TJ Guy, but he is like the prototypical, like tall, long arm, big strider kind of guy who's just got like a perfect frame for the role. I think he could be a player who could get drafted this year as well, even though he played like a very rotational heavy role last year. So they have a lot of quality players there. Brandt's just a junior. Guy's a graduate, so he's got to go. Again, don't have a round grade on Guy yet, but based on what I've seen from just watching a lot of Michigan defensive tape, I'm much higher on him than apparently Dane is at this point.
So, Bill, how about you? What should Owen be looking at for TJ Guy as he goes to do a deeper watch?
Yeah, so for me, I have TJ Guy right now as my edge overall, my edge 19, so kind of like an early 4th round grade. And I still think Dane's too low on him. This is a guy, the big games that I watched that I enjoyed from a draft perspective, hated from a fan perspective, was the IU game, where he made that IU offensive line and he made Curtis Rourke's day rough. You'd also look at the Washington game too. That was another game that, a little bit difficult to deal with when you talk about TJ Guy.
And Washington is Owen's team. And my guess is that he had already watched Indiana, right? Because we did the Indiana podcast with Owen. So I'm confident he would have, even though Owen yesterday didn't say which games he watched, I bet Washington and Indiana were at the top of that list. So that's interesting that you said that, but keep going, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, those 2 games were probably his best games. The concern with me for Guy, and Sam, I don't know how you feel about it, his explosiveness just seems limited. And I don't know if that's compared to, some of the other edge rushers that they have at Michigan. And there he goes. So he watched Indiana. So don't watch Washington, Owen. If that's your favorite team, you're not going to be in for a good time. But I mean, he converts speed to power well. It's just there's not really an explosiveness from Guy. Like, he's just kind of there. And something like that, I've seen him flash the ability to stack and shed, but I want to be more consistent with that. He also tends to play a little too high coming off the snap, so I need to see a lower pad level. The framework's there for TJ Guy, and I'm with you, Sam. I have him over Derek Moore. I'm not sure where we get all this Derek Moore love from in the community. I don't see it. But if I were a betting man, and I'm not saying I'm betting, please play responsibly when you make any sort of bets on any NFL draft prospects, please. I would put my money on TJ Guy as a top 100 guy before I do Derek Moore, but I don't know how you would feel about that, Sam.
Yeah, I don't know if I would ever get to the top 100. I think you're looking at more of a backup role primarily from the NFL, but I do think he's a guy who would go early 5th round or higher. I don't think you're looking at like a late day 3 pick, certainly. So, I mean, that's like just me being optimistic, but I do think this guy's better than, he had an edge 28 among the seniors. So you drop the juniors into that. You're talking about guys probably like in the late 30s, early 40s overall in the class and edges, and he's just not that. He's better than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you consider the last 3 years, we've had an average of 20 edges drafted in total. So you're saying that, he's edge 17 amongst the seniors. Drop the juniors in there. Now you're saying essentially not really draftable talent. I'm with you. I don't see that one either.
So here's a couple things that I'm observing. I'm looking at the preseason top 30 seniors list. Danny Dennis Sutton from Penn State at 5, Derek Moore at 6. Further down, I see Gabe Yakas at 7. I see Cassius Howell from Texas A&M at 11. And Mikel Kamara at 19. I know that several within the draft professor community really like Kamara. So for Kamara to be at 19, Bill, to your point, where if 20 edges get drafted, you're saying, like a lot of people are saying Kamara at day 2. I know Owen likes Kamara too. So Sam, where are you on the players I listed? And you can take them in any order that you want.
Yeah, Kamara I view as more of a 4th-round type player. I just think there are moments where he looks a little overwhelmed against guys who have just more natural height and mass to them, as well as the longer arms. So just moments where he tends to get a little bit too engulfed, in my opinion. But looking through like the rankings, there seems to be a little bit of body typing here in terms of like the Ruben Bain being not in the top 7, and then having Kyle Kamara's like the more extreme version of that in terms of like the height and stuff like that is also ranked pretty low. This just reeks like NFL feedback in my opinion, because I think again, like from a more media-based perspective, there's certainly a lot more love for him. But Kamara's motor is excellent. He does have some decent pass rush moves overall. Like I like the player, but I think you're dealing with some more limitations with him. Frankly, like Octus is hard for me to figure out. Like I had like a mid-day 3 grade on him last year, and he always is making an impact. It just works for him in college, but I don't personally I have trouble squaring his game with how it translates to the pros. My opinion though is like the grouping like for him on the seniors, you got Dennis Sutton 5, Derek Moore 6, Octus 7, Joshua Joseph from Tennessee at 8. Personally, I think there's a lot more potential in like Max Llewellyn at 9, Cassius Howell 11, Patrick Payton 12, Tyreek Sapp 13. You give me those 4 over the 4 of Dennis Sutton, Moore, Octus, and Josephs. I'd rather have that second group of 4 players above them, honestly. Like I think those groups of guys are more talented. Howell is probably, like, in my opinion, the best pass rusher of that entire group. And Peyton might have the best physical upside, even though I don't think we're going to get there with him. He's probably not going to realize all of that, considering the amount of time we've been waiting for him to break out. I do find it interesting Trey Moore's on this list, because Trey Moore is playing off-ball linebacker this year. So that's a bit of an interesting inclusion on Dane's part. But, I think I have like a ton of discrepancies here with the senior list. I think he's got like among the top 15, I think he's got like the 15 right names. You add in Kamara and maybe TJ Guy, but they're just in a completely different order than I would ever be willing to put them in right now. Because Dennis Sutton to me is like a pure power rusher, but doesn't have very many pass rush moves or counters, doesn't have much bend. He's kind of, to me, just the guy with a really good frame. Moore, we've kind of hinted that, just doesn't have, to me, it looks very, I know he's 265, but it looks very, small in comparison sometimes. And just doesn't have the level of explosiveness and bend you would expect for a guy built with his frame. I mentioned Ox, I can't really figure it out right now. I'm just having difficulty with him. And then everyone wants Joshua Joseph to be the next James Pierce, because he's 237. He's supposed to be like this undersized, explosive guy, but he's not that explosive, and he's not that bendy. And Pierce had a bit of a Pierce didn't have the most developed pass rush repertoire, but his speed and explosiveness were legitimate. And you just don't get that from Joseph, but you get all of the negatives that came with Pierce and none of the real positives. So I think that's a player who I view as more of a midday 3 guy. But Howell, to me, it has some physical limitations with the arm and the size, but Howell's pass rush plan is one of the best in the class by far. It's why he's able to win so often at Texas A&M, and why whenever I put a Texas A&M defensive game on, I'm just writing Cassius Howell notes all the time while trying to scout offensive linemen.
100%. And I'm with Sam. I don't see the order of the senior, and I'm glad you mentioned Josh Josephs and the James Pierce. I get the feeling that we're trying to pigeonhole Danny Dennis Sutton into the Abdul Carter role this season, just like we're trying to do with Josh Josephs and James Pierce. I just don't see it. I see a guy that he reminds me a lot of Greg Rousseau when he was at Miami, but if Greg Rousseau was a bit stockier. For me, I just have a hard time. I would go Llewellyn, Yakis, Patrick Payton, and then I would have a conversation of Danny Dennis Sutton after that. But to have guys like Llewellyn, Patrick Payton, I'm not as high on Cassius Howell. I think he's a great pass rusher, but I'm still waiting for the run defense. But I see the vision. I see the path that people see. I also have concerns that he plays for Texas A&M, and any Texas A&M defender scares the daylights out of me with how we saw Scourton and both Shamars. So I see the path there. But yeah, the names are right, but it seems like the order just kind of feels pulled out of a hat / they talked to a couple of front office folks that just came out of a draft cycle and like are looking at some frequently top names and kind of ordered them like that rather than how their tape actually plays out. I have a hard time believing that Dane's list will remain the same for too much longer.
Do you think the measurables affected how he ranked him? Like, Sam, it sounded to me like when you gave your explanation, that's what I heard when you spoke, is that the guys towards the top of Dane's list look the part based upon measurements. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think for the most part, that's correct. There's some guys who kind of throw a wrench in it, like R. Mason Thomas is definitely not prototypical. Joshua Joseph is not the prototypical type player either. Those are both top 10 guys on his senior board. I think Trey Moore could even fall into this because he's 6'1.5", 246, and he's 10 among all seniors. But I think like Overton, I would say Bailey. I know Bailey is like, there's still a lot for him to work on. He might be tapped out frame-wise, but he's going to like check the 250 box. That's just good enough for some people. And Zion Young are also like these guys who would definitely meet the frame requirements. Definitely all the top underclassmen like Falk, Parker, Uyanga, like they all meet the frame requirements. So I think that I agree with you. Like they tend to lean towards those players with some exceptions. Even like going down the list further, like you see there's some undersized guys really towards the bottom, but you have guys like Anthony Lucas or who kind of ends up at 14. When you watch Romello Height is at 15. Romello Height's a much better pass rusher than Anthony Lucas is right now, but he's ranked below him on the board because Romello Height's 228 and Anthony Lucas is 279. And so, or at least according to the numbers put in here. So I do think that there's some body type casting in here in terms of who's favored and who's not, but you do have exceptions like R. Mason Thomas and apparently Joshua Josephs, who the league seems to really like, and who Dane has ranked this high because, R. Mason Thomas is clear to see. And with Josephs, there's some projection that he could be another one of these explosive Tennessee edges, even though I don't think that's quite right.
Right.
Okay.
Bill, let me ask you.
Oh,
Bill, let me
go
ask you this. Going to some of the underclassmen for a minute, because I think there's a cutoff after the top 6. We mentioned the top 4. 5 is Kenyatta Jackson, who's been more of this rotational player for Ohio State through the past 2 years. And then 6 is Anto Saka, who got injured and kind of played through injuries for the second half this past year. Do either one of those players strike you as potential first rounders?
Not as potential first rounders. If you told me Anto Saka got into the top 64, I would agree with it because he is a kind of second, third round grade for me right now. He actually sits at number 82 on my board currently. So if you told me top 64, I'd agree with it. Kenyatta Jackson, to be utterly transparent, Kenyatta Jackson is a UDFA for me. I just don't see any path to him getting to top 32, top 50, maybe top 100, just based on the talent that, I see from him. This is a guy for me, like, yeah, you see a little bit of explosiveness and you see a little bit of a decent first step, but the pass rush plan, it's I go fast, I go around you. And even then it's not explosive enough to do that. He also has this weird tendency, especially on play action, that I caught on a little bit early on. And if I caught on to it, I know other teams did. He bites on play action fake really hard. He struggles with misdirection. So if you get a counter and get him leaning one way, he just doesn't have the explosiveness to get back the other way. So I know there's a lot of love for Kenyatta Jackson. I just don't see it. And Saka, like you said, spent most of his time injured. So obviously want to see him healthy. I think he could get there. If you keep going down the list with those underclassmen, guys like Anthony Smith, Will Helpt, Boubacar Traore, I'm a little bit higher on than the field. I think he could end up being like a diet Khalil Mack in terms of what you're going to get from him. But you have the conversation of where do you play him? Do you play him hand into the dirt? Do you play him standing up in linebacker, even though he can't really cover well? Do you kind of rotate him between the two? How do you play him? So I think that's the conversation that we have to have with some of those underclassmen is what does their body type allow them to do? Are they healthy enough to do it? And then do they have enough tangible traits, whether it be power, whether it be speed, whether it be both, to be able to say, okay, I feel comfortable pushing them up the board. And I think that's the good part and the bad part about underclassmen. The good part is they can come back, even if they don't fully develop this year, they can come back another year. The bad part is, like we talked about at the top of the hour, you come back, you're now a year older and the expectations for you are significantly higher. So how much of it do you have to say, okay, well, I have to do some developing at the NFL level? And I don't see a world where Kenyatta Jackson and Anton Saka are top 50 guys. Maybe if you wanted to roll the dice on one of them, I'd roll the dice on Saka, but they are the type of guys you would give a let someone else take them and develop them type of grade too.
Yeah, I would take Saka. I have him at 44. I would draft him in the top 50. I like him going back to his tape from 2023. He had like a stretch where he beat the Illinois tackle for like a game-ending sack. He beat Graham Barton. He beat someone else who was also like a legitimate NFL prospect that year at tackle. Came back this year, was healthy through the first half of the season, was not healthy, was playing hurt the second half of the year. It was unfortunately a pretty noticeable drop-off. He's like super explosive. I think he's got more tools to him in terms of actual having strength, and actually has probably even better bend than Mason Thomas. So I have him ranked a little bit higher than Mason Thomas. I'm below Bailey, but ahead of Mason Thomas by a few spots. Now he gives you a little bit more in run defense, even though Northwestern's played him primarily as a rotational player, which I've gotten questions from, and I've questioned myself as to why that's the case, because he's, in my opinion, like clearly the most talented player left in their defense at this point.
Yeah.
But I think that's I don't know if it's a scheme or a program problem, but right now, Saka to me is a guy who could go top 50. First round I get him would probably be a little bit difficult. I don't know if the arm length will really be there for him to do that. But he's like a super freaky, explosive, high motor guy who I think, gives you more run defense than David Bailey does, and gives you more natural athleticism than maybe even Mason Thomas does. So I think he could be one of those guys who ends up being this top of the second round type player who comes in and plays pretty significant snaps early in his career. I'm not quite with you with Kenyatta Jackson being UDFA, but I am a guy who doesn't view him as like a top 100 guy right now. The tools are obviously there. The body type is there, but he is not really fully delivered. I mean, both him and Caden Curry, honestly, are a pretty significant step down from like Caden Curry. I am with you. I am a UDFA grade at Caden Curry. Like I am there with that player, but both those guys are a pretty significant step down from what Ohio State's had in the past. The other guys on this list, like Anthony Smith, to me is more of an interior player than a true defensive end. Like he doesn't have the bend to be like an edge, like a typical edge rusher per se. I think you're lining it more inside the tackle than anything else. Will Helt, I watched. I mean, Will Helt doesn't move the needle for me at all, really. Like, I've seen some late push for him this summer, and he just, to me, is just a guy, really. Like, I don't see him being someone who's going to declare this year. Unless, maybe the Air Clemson defensive line gets so much attention that he just gets a lot of one-on-one opportunities. Maybe that helps him out.
Right.
Traore, like, I am with you on him. I see him as a guy who could be, like, this top 100 player, could be really good. I do think like there's obviously some lack of development there because he doesn't have a lot of career snaps at this point. And he's a player who I thought needed to gain weight last year, but then you get injured. And so you take all the time in rehab. You're not gaining weight during that time. So it just sets you back pretty significantly. But I am a player. Like I see the vision for him. And then like I don't have an official round grade on Bo Atkinson yet, the North Carolina transfer to Ohio State. But like every time I watch North Carolina defenses, obviously like Tommy Rucker is the best edge rusher, but he was hurt all last year. Taking him out of the picture, Atkinson was one player who jumped out to me pretty consistently. But that was more of like a, off and on and flashy kind of role. So I'll be curious to see what he does now at a bigger program in the Big Ten with a little more competition at the offensive tackle position across the board.
So I noticed a small school player on Dane's list, Roy Williams from Northern Illinois. Is that a player either of you have watched?
Yeah, I've watched Roy Williams extensively. I'm glad Dane brought some light to the Northern Illinois player because he's one of my small school guys that you got to keep an eye on. This is a guy over the last 2 years has had 10 sacks. Has a relentless motor, very good energy, a good first step quickness, and solid bend. He's a DPR type of player. right now in his current part, but he reminds me a lot of like James Houston vibes, which is kind of my comp for him in that same mold. I want him to be more consistent when stacking and shedding blockers in the run game. Right now, if you told me that you drafted him as a DPR somewhere on, kind of that day 3-ish range, I wouldn't bat an eye at it, especially when you look at his size. I had 6'3", 245, and supposedly the NFL, NFL verified measurements have him at 6'5.5", 252. So if he is 6'5", 252, and he has that explosive ability at that size, I think that he'll find a home somewhere on day 3 for someone that just needs an extra body as a pass rusher, especially considering the fact that he has produced at NIU in the past 2 years with 3.5 and 6.5 sacks last year. But Sam, was there anybody else that caught your eye on Dane's list?
We've hit on most of the guys who I wanted to talk about. I mean, I caught through now Anthony Lucas at 14, Romello Height at 15. I know, are you the one who's pretty high in Romello Height among our group? I'm not entirely sure.
I'm the low one on
You're the
Romello
low
Height.
one. Okay.
I'm the low one. I see the vision with Romello Height, but it takes me a second to get there. I gotta take the glasses off, wipe them off, put them back on, take them off, wipe them off again, put them back on, and then I see it. But
yeah, I think he's
I'm there with you. It depend when you see what he could be. I see what people are talking about with Romello.
Yeah,
and that was Romello Height from Texas Tech, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
correct.
Georgia Tech transferred to Texas Tech. I've got more of like a midday 3 grade on him right now, and the player right above him on the list is Anthony Lucas. So I know our Anthony Russo has said he could be a first round pick. He has put that out there on Twitter. I I found it today. No, unfortunately, missed a large chunk of this past season. Had a lower body injury against Penn State. I know Mike Brenner is also very high on him. I personally am just not there. I mean, he's like 275 or so. Let me see. He's 279. But you look at his body type on film, he's like very long arms, like good build overall, but he's walking on stilts a little bit there. Like his lowers are very thin. He's not that great in the run game. Doesn't have a lot of bending. He's a little high cut. So to me, I've seen some hype for Anthony Lucas over the past year and a half. To me, I'm more of like I'd rather have Romello Height, honestly. Like I'd rather have a guy who I know has some pass rush chops versus someone like Anthony Lucas. So I think is more of a projection, still inexperienced, and I think is not quite what his measurables will sell you on him being. So I just want to throw out those 2 names because like after that for me, after those 15 names are in the senior list, it really drops off and you're kind of ranging into UDFA territory with the exception of Kamara. So I think that's where the cutoff is there. And then even like for the underclassmen, we talk about Traore at 9 and then Bo Atkins at 10, but like there's some guys here like Damon Wilson at Missouri could be good. Wesley Williams at Duke, I know has some love, but there's a lot of names here towards the bottom of the list. I'm like, I don't see even considering declaring this year unless they have a real breakout season.
100%. And I'll even throw like Samuel Okanala from Colorado, another guy that you probably want to keep your eye on, but I wouldn't spend too much time. He's got a day 3 grade for me right now, and I don't expect to see him this year. But yeah, when you get past probably somewhere between the 10 to 12 range on both lists, you start venturing into kind of that day 3 UDFA, PFA, guys that you'll see signed the first or second week after the draft type of territory.
Yeah. And there are some guys who are like redshirt sophomores who aren't included on this list at all because they don't fit in either category. I'm just going to chuck a few names out here. If I can say them correctly, because there are a couple of pronunciations here, Bill. I'm going to ask you to hold me to it. But Clev Lubin, who was a Coastal Carolina edge, transferred to Louisville this year. I watched a quarter for him just to get a feel. Like undersized but super explosive type player, the kind of guy you would kind of expect from that school to have. So he's the player I'm going to be interested in running up here. Tidum Tuioti is the other edge at Oregon, the other edge at Oregon who plays.
Yes.
He was their edge 3 this past year. To me, he's more of a 2027 kind of guy. There's still some development that has to take place there, but there's some like I could see if you wanted to draft him as a team if he declared in like the 4th or 5th round, I could get behind that. And then Kua Rusaw from Alabama. I think he's also a redshirt sophomore. I know some people. I forget who. Someone in the draft professor came out and said
I
they
think
really.
it was Durst.
Yeah, I think it was. Have a really high grade on him. I haven't written him up yet, so I can't give you really feedback there. But they had him highly ranked as well. And then Princewell Umamielen transferred to Ole Miss, so I didn't think had a really impactful year this past year, but with that defensive front and how they reload with those transfers, you might see a big bump in production from him this year.
Yep. And of those names, I'll piggyback on Uman Mielen and, Tuioli. I think both of them have a path to be drafted this season, but it would be a day 3, be around 4, round 5. You take a flyer on a young guy with some traits, with some ability at that point. But I think we see them in 2027 when this edge class explodes. I mean, you have Texas, you have South Carolina, you have a lot of talent at both of those schools in 2027. I think we're in a bit of a lull right now with summer scouting with some of these edges because we don't have that guy that has, burst onto the scene. Like we talked about at the top of the hour, they're either one side or the other, either really big and strong, but not explosive, or really explosive and not big and strong. So I'm curious to see where we go. And this is the one thing we love about Dane's list. It always gets us talking here in the middle of July as we ramp up into another scouting cycle.
And I actually think I try to be away from the hype. So I'll check out, Dane on The Athletic, and I will check out other draft podcasts. But I don't have to go consume a lot of big boards outside of the draft professor. Like Sam, I can check out your Substack. Bill, you and I communicate what feels like more than I communicate with my kids. So if I have a question on a player, I don't need to go outside and try to find out the hype. And here's where I was going with that. So we may not have a consensus player at the top. It seems like the top 5, 4 of the top 5 edges seem to be consistent whenever I look at anybody's board. Generally speaking, right? So there's at least a little bit of consensus as to who's at the top. But the fact that it's not even like edge 1, as to who's at the top. To me, that's what I would call job security for podcasters and content creators like us. Because we're going to be covering this every week for the next, 9 months.
Long time.
Yeah.
Long time. Months, half a
Long
year.
time.
Yeah. So do we want to pause for a quick commercial here and then summarize this and move on with our evening?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. So Sam, you want to let everybody know who you are. I didn't think you needed an introduction, but go for it anyway.
Yeah, so my name is Sam Teets. I run the Substack Sports Talk with Sam Teets. We have about 1,500 followers over there. Trying to get content out there basically every day, every weekday, so 5 times a week. Might not happen tomorrow because I'm tired. I want to go to bed and don't want to write one report for tomorrow, but we'll get you back on Saturday. So at this point, we're putting out, again, probably 5 scouting reports, or at least 4 per week at this point. That's over on Substack. You can go to substack.com, search Sports Talk with Sam Teets, and subscribe for free to get all my content sent directly to your email at no charge. Again, we're putting together a new big board. We got some exciting projects going on. There'll be some preseason all-conference teams coming out here the next month and a half, hopefully. And then you'll have the regular scouting reports coming out basically daily. So if you want to keep up to date on all the latest reports and kind of get a general feel for how this class is turning out, I try to throw out a mix of top-end talent in those reports, but also get you some day 3 guys and maybe even some guys for 2027 to get your teeth into.
Bill.
Yes, you can find all of my content all over the internet, mainly over on X at Spark Scouting. But I'm also on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and I'm also on Substack as well. If you search Spark Scouting, you'll see my lovely mug pop up. Also a writer and analyst for the Right Way Sports Network. It's twsn.net, covering NFL and NFL draft topics. And you can check me out here with the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft podcast, typically Wednesday nights and Friday nights. Sometimes I'll just show up randomly on a Monday. Jim has already mentioned it. I'll be on later tonight with EJ and Andrew talking Miami's draft class and their prospects. And then you'll see me tomorrow with Anthony Russo talking the quarterbacks of this class. And we've got some good ones. In addition, folks, he won't say it, but I certainly will. Make sure you go check out draftprofessor.com and check out Jim's draft simulator. It is the best one out there on the internet. And I was not paid to say that. I'm saying it of my own free will and volition. But Jim, where can the people find you?
Thank you, Bill. So I can be found at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. It is the same on X and YouTube. The single best thank you can give is to hit the subscribe on YouTube. This podcast will also be on Spotify. So if you like catching podcasts in audio form, we upload it to Spotify sometime at the end of the podcast. So if you like listening, and I believe from podcasts to go, or from Spotify, it goes to like Apple Podcasts and other locations. So if you're looking for draft content, we have it every day. So this week, every day meant we broke down. Now I have to remember the schools. It was LSU, Arizona State, Michigan last night, Miami tonight, quarterbacks on Friday. We have a running back big board on Sunday. The next week, the schools we cover are Ohio State, Auburn, Colorado, Baylor, and TCU. So Baylor and TCU will be the same podcast. So that should actually be a good one because there's a couple of good quarterbacks on that one. And then we have a sleeper podcast on Friday night with Anthony Russo. We also have Ian Cummings and Dalton Miller coming on the channel to do a cornerback big board, and I believe that's less than 21 days away. So we have content coming at you every day. I just rattled it off. If you follow on X, you'll find all about it. And I want to second the Substack for both Bill and Sam. I am in both of their Substacks. If I need to find information on a player, those are the first two places I go. So with that being said, anything, I guess I'll throw in a disclaimer. And if any of you want to add in your disclaimer, we are discussing Dane Brugler's edge board and the analysis that has been done by us on the same position group. This was not meant to criticize anybody's rankings. Everybody is always allowed to have their own rankings at Draft Professor. So the disclaimer for the podcast is we are not criticizing the rankings, just simply saying how we see portions of the group differently. Any additional disclaimers that Sam or Bill that you guys want to give? Because I don't know that we said that at the beginning of the podcast.
No, I think the big thing I'll stress is we really appreciate all the work that guys like Dane and Sam and all the other draft professors do to put rankings like that together. And it's just a conversation piece about how we all view things differently with the edge class. Some of us like length, some of us like explosiveness, some of us like all of it. So it's not necessarily meant to criticize. It's just a conversation piece, and it's the same conversations that go on behind closed doors for NFL talent evaluators. And we can just chat it up and chop it up. And a lot of times it's easier to do it on a podcast like me and Sam did tonight than in a group chat.
Yeah, I agree. Like, love Dane's stuff. It'd be boring if everyone agreed on the rankings. So, it's great to have the conversation. And Dane's, the reason why I do reviews of Dane's stuff is because he is a big name in the industry, so well established for the work he does. And he's so thorough with it, which is why we, have a show based around his rankings. So yeah, it wasn't meant to criticize, just meant to give our own personal opinions because his are out there publicly now, and it's just a really good conversation starter.
Yep. And Dane Brugler, if you catch any portion of this podcast and you want to come on and discuss it, please and thank you, of course. We can get draft professors on to talk about any of the above. So we look forward to it. So with that being said, for the 82 draft professors, for Bill, for Sam, for myself, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will see you on a podcast again at 9 p.m. to cover the University of Miami.
Thanks, folks.